All right, we're recording this and live streaming it on YouTube. So if you want to watch it again, you can watch it on our YouTube channel, or if any of your friends missed it, they can find it on the YouTube channel as well. All right, I think we'll probably get started as people are still coming in. Welcome to the Broadway Books annual holiday book chat. Quiet in the peanut gallery. Never did we imagine that we'd be coming to you via Zoom again this year, but here we are. So we appreciate your willingness to log on to yet another Zoom event. So we encourage you to grab a glass of your favorite beverage. And sit back and listen to Kim and I talk as quickly as we can about our favorite books for the gift-giving holiday season. Before we start, I just wanted to point out a couple things on our website that are very helpful. If you look on those icons in the green colored bar, you'll see book suggestions. When you click on that link, it'll take you to all different kinds of book suggestions by genre. And then if you go to the staff picks link, below each person's little face, you'll find something that says holiday picks, and it'll have a list of what each of us are most excited to give and get this holiday season. And then if you go to award winners, which is somewhere, scroll up to the top, Elle. On the menu, is there a menu at the top? There you go. Award winners right there. That will show you the finalists and the winners for the most recent literary prizes, including the Booker, the Pulitzer, and the National Book Awards. The New York Times annual top 10 will be announced tomorrow morning, so we'll get those posted as soon as we can. So those are some places on our website where you can go and find some ideas. And then, of course, there is our annual holiday book guide that you can use as a resource. We have printed copies available in the store, but there's a version online that you can click on that little picture right there. That'll show you the annual holiday book guide. And just a reminder that through our partnership with Libro.fm, you can now purchase either individual digital audiobooks as gifts or 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months memberships. And with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for being with us tonight. I wanted to just tell you a quick little bit about the fact that Sally and I both have created web links to the list of books we're going to be talking tonight. And Eloise is going to go ahead and put them in the chat for us. It's right on the events page in our website that you clicked on to see this event. But so Ellie will share that link in the chat and it'll send you right to that page, and then you'll be able to see Kim's links and Sally's links there, and that way you it just saves you from having to write everything down. They're handy dandy list. The other thing I want to say is we feel pretty blessed to be your local independent bookstore. We feel pretty excited to be a part of the Portland community, and one of the best things about shopping local is that we also support local, and we decided to put that to work this past weekend. So last Saturday was Indie's first day, or Small Business Saturday, and we decided we were going to donate 15% of our sales to the Northeast Emergency Food Project, which is an amazing organization that's feeding a whole host of folks who need help in Northeast Portland, actually from all over the city, but they're really focused on Northeast Portland. And because of everyone's wonderful contributions on Saturday and shopping on Saturday, we're able to give over $1,000 to Northeast Emergency Food Project. So thank you. I see some of you clapping, and I'm just going to clap right back at you. It's all because you guys are supporting local. It allows us to support local as well. So, and then so I've got the links, the money.
Do a book.
All right, I'm going up first. So Sally and I both decided that we would tell you right off the bat what our favorite books of the year were. Now, you should know we're booksellers, so that just changes every day. But for this moment right now, my favorite book of the year is Omar El-Akkad's What Strange Paradise. This is a beautiful novel. Focuses on an unnamed island in the Mediterranean that's accepting refugees from North Africa, all over Africa. And the story is starts off with a young boy who's washed up on the shore with a whole other host of folks who were on the boat with him. and he is the only survivor. He is then snatched up from the beach by a young girl who realizes if he's found, he's going to end up in all different kinds of scenarios. And so she grabs him off the beach to feed him and care for him. And this starts a story of how he ended up on the beach, how he ended up on the boat, and in turn, how their interactions create understanding between them and the folks that are on the island, and a much better understanding for us of what life is like when you can't be home and you can't leave. So this is a beautiful, beautiful book. For those of you who've never read Omar Al-Khayyam before, he just won the Giller Prize, which is the Canadian Fiction Prize. He's, Sally's showing you his other book, which was American War, which was also award winning. He was up for the National Book Award. He was on the short list for the National Book Award for this book. And he lives in Portland now, and he is just a wonderful, wonderful human. So this was my favorite book of the year, which for today, which is going to lead me to tell you about some other fiction titles. One of my other favorites of the year is the Love Songs of W.B. Du Bois. Maybe some of you have heard about this. This one came out as an Oprah pick. This is by Honoré Fanonne Jeffers. This is a big book. This is all of a Christmas Vacation kind of book. This is an epic saga. A young woman growing up in the North, but summers every year in Alabama with her family in the South. Oh, I'm sorry. Chickasetta, Georgia is where she goes in the South every summer. So she feels like she's of two worlds, and she wants to understand better her family's history. And so thus begins the saga of her family. And as you can imagine, their story is not all great, and lots and lots and lots of tragedy and challenge and enslavement, but a lot of beauty and wonder in this book as well. So I think this is, I think Oprah's got it right on this one. This is a gem of a book, The Love Songs of W.B. Du Bois. And I'm telling you about some fiction books tonight that maybe you haven't heard of, because as you all know, every writer in all of America put out a book this year. So I'm telling you about ones that maybe are off your radar. The next one is called Civilizations by Laurent Binet. Their other book, which I can't pronounce, is HHHH, which I didn't read. Civilizations is a retelling of, I'm going to read my notes, an ambitious and highly entertaining novel of revisionist history from the author of the international bestseller. Laurent Binet's Civilizations is nothing less than a strangely believable counterfactual history of the modern world. It's fizzing with ideas about colonization, empire building, and the eternal human quest for domination. It's an electrifying novel, and it's by one of Europe's most exciting writers. So again, maybe one that's not on your radar, but might be for someone who's interested in digging deep and understanding why civilization is today. And then I just don't think we could be solid booksellers if we didn't talk about Louise Erdrich's new novel, The Sentence. The premise of The Sentence is one of their, as you may all know, Louise Erdrich owns a small bookstore in Minneapolis. And this story takes place in a small bookstore in Minneapolis. One of their most fretful and annoying customers dies on All Saints Days in October or early November, fall of 2019. And that customer haunts them for a year. And the mystery around that, and the magic of that, and the humor of things that happen behind the scenes in the bookstore. Again, I just don't think we could be legitimate booksellers without talking about this book. So Louise Erdrich's new book, The Sentence, and we have copies of all of these right now, which is sort of amazing and overwhelming. And I'm going to share now. I'm going to pass to Sally.
Okay, this is where the speed dating part comes in. So I'm going to talk about my favorite book of the year, which is How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. Clint Smith is a poet. His previous collection was Counting Descent. His new book was actually originally intended to be a collection of poems focusing on monuments and landmarks to slavery. But as he began researching these places and talking to people about them, it grew into a work of narrative nonfiction. In fact, he says he learned to become a journalist writing this book, and now he is a staff writer for The Atlantic magazine. Clint Smith is a Black man who grew up in New Orleans, attending schools named after men who enslaved his ancestors and driving on roads named after men who considered his people chattel. In the book, he writes about Thomas Jefferson's Monticello plantation, where Jefferson owned more than 400 slaves while writing about the importance of freedom, and about the Whitney plantation, which is the only former plantation open to the public that focuses on the experiences of the enslaved and not on the masters. He also writes about Angola, which is a former plantation turned maximum security prison in Louisiana that is filled with Black inmates who work across the 18,000 acre land for virtually no pay while being patrolled by guards on horseback, which sounds like just another plantation to me. It even has a gift shop where you can purchase items like mugs that say Angola, a gated community, which I find mind-boggling that a prison would have a gift shop. And he tells the story of Blandford Cemetery, the final resting place of tens of thousands of Confederate soldiers, which holds a commemoration ceremony each year to celebrate the Confederate soldiers. Each chapter is incredibly moving and eye-opening and written with the sensibility of a poet. But the most moving chapter for me was the final chapter, where he interviews two of his grandparents. The grandfather of his grandfather on his mother's side was enslaved, and the grandfather of his grandmother on his father's side was born 5 years after slavery ostensibly ended and was a sharecropper. So when Clint's kids sit on their grandparents' laps, they are that close to the world of slavery. It just isn't that far in the past. In fact, his grandfather tells him that Emmett Till was killed in the next town over from where he and his wife lived. After all the research he has done, Smith says in the book, I had forgotten that the best primary sources are often sitting right next to us. So that's my book of the year. And now I get to talk about another book that I've been waiting a long time for, one that was delayed by that dreadful, can we all say it together, supply chain disruption. But it has finally arrived, and it is definitely worth the wait. The Northwest Gardens of Lord and Scriber, written by Felencia Libby and published by our wonderful friends at Oregon State University Press, tells the story of the first woman-owned landscape architecture firm in the Pacific Northwest. Edith Lord came from an established Salem family. In fact, her father served on the Oregon Supreme Court and as Oregon's 9th governor. And Edith Eleanor Scriber grew up in a working class family in New York. The two met in June 1927 on a ship to Great Britain, both on a European travel course sponsored by the Cambridge School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture for Women and the Lothrop School of Landscape Architecture, from which Edith had graduated and Elizabeth was currently attending. For 3 months, they traveled through Scotland, England, France, and Italy, visiting historic sites, estates, and gardens. Then they separated from the group and flew to Calais in a 12-passenger plane with wicker seats. I love that. And toured Germany and Austria on their own. When they returned to the US, Edith went back to work and Eleanor went back to Lothrop, but they maintained their friendship and then moved to Salem together. And on January 1st, 1929, they established their company. They worked with nurserymen and contractors who were unaccustomed to working with women, but the two definitely held their own ground. They also taught courses, lectured around the state, wrote a series of newspaper articles, and conducted a live radio broadcast from studios at what is now OSU, Oregon State University. Together, they worked on more than 200 commissions during their 40 years of partnership before retiring in 1969. Gaiety Hollow in Salem was their home studio and personal garden, and it is now open to the public as the Lord and Scriber Conservancy. And there's some great artwork in here. There's some of the plans they drew, some photographs of some of their work. There's Eleanor and Edith. And here's one that I particularly like. Which of course I can't find now. There it is. There you go. So you get to see some color pictures of them. So for anyone interested in gardening, landscape architecture, Pacific Northwest history, or just learning about two strong pioneering women, this would make a great gift. A couple of other gardening related books. Private Gardens of the Pacific Northwest is a lushly illustrated coffee table book showcasing 20 private gardens, including several in the Portland area. And it also includes the Art Wolf's garden, Art Wolf, the photographer who lives in the Seattle area. A book a little less visually oriented, but equally appealing is In Kiltumper, A Year in an Irish Garden. This husband and wife decided to leave New York City and move to Christine's ancestral home in the town of Kiltumper in rural Ireland. And then they decided, as the land was threatened by the arrival of turbines just one farm over, they decided to document a year of living in their garden and in a small corner of a rapidly changing world, proceeding month by month through the year and with beautiful seasonal illustrations. This is a story of a garden in all its many splendors and a couple who have made their life observing its wonders. This isn't a book necessarily about gardening, but about living in and with a garden. And he, you might recognize his name, is the author of this best-selling novel and one of our staff favorites, which has just come out in paperback. And with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly.
All right, now moving into picture books. I've got a couple of favorite picture books. My first bit tonight is Red and Green and Blue and White. And for those of you that celebrate Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah. Red and Green and Blue and White is about a lovely neighborhood where there is a house on the block where instead of red and green lights, they have blue and white lights. And they light their Hanukkah menorah in the middle of their window, as you're supposed to. And unfortunately, a rock is thrown through their window, and in solidarity of community, the as opposed to being overwhelmed and knocked down, the entire community decides that they're going to have blue and white in their windows too. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story and a wonderful celebration of Hanukkah, and of family and of solidarity and of community. This is a beautiful book. Red and Green, Blue and White. My other favorite is The Night Walk, another story about night. Young, adorable children are awakened in the early morning and taken out on a night walk with their mother and father. And you see them wandering around the neighborhood and seeing things in the dark they might not have seen before, like the hotel in their area looking like a chandelier. And they magically make it through the forest, past the lake, and end up watching the sunrise together. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. And it was actually one of the top illustrated books from the New York Times this year as well. So The Night Walk. This is by Marie Dorleans. One of my other favorites, these next two are just both so spectacular. Aaron Slater, illustrator, and maybe some of you know the Rosie Revere engineer or Iggy Peck architect. Andrea Beatty has done just such a wonderful job with this whole series of what she's calling this the questioners, all about kids who have questions and the magic of inquiry and learning. Aaron Slater, illustrator, is I think my favorite by far, which is kind of amazing because they're all really good. Aaron Slater is starting school and he needs to learn how to read, and it's coming slower to him than it does to some other kids. And he realizes he has to write a story and stand up in front of the class to share a story. And his amazing and wonderful teacher reminds him that he sees things in illustrations and with colorful description. So there's him imagining writing and reading. It might be hard to see, but the letters are backwards and sideways. So we're not sure whether or not Aaron is neurodivergent, but reading is coming a little slower. And the illustrations in this book, as Aaron discovers what his true talent is, it's just spectacular. So Aaron Slater, illustrator by Andrea Beatty. And then my favorite picture book, one of my very favorite picture books of the year, is a biography of Nina Simone done by Christian Robinson and Tracy N. Todd, whose parents purposely called her Tracy N. Todd so that her initials were TNT. And this book is fantastic. And they've written essentially the story of Nina Simone. Well, they haven't written it. They're sharing with us the story of Nina Simone. And if you've seen Christian Robinson's illustrations before, he's an award-winning illustrator. Done beautiful, beautiful things. And he captures the true spirit of the power of Nina Simone and her voice. And I'm going to read you this one section. It says, Nina Simone sang the whole story of Black America for everyone to hear. Her voice resounded with the love, joy, and power of it all. And when she sang of Black children, you lovely, precious dreams, her voice sounded like hope. This book is beautiful. So Nina by Tracy N. Todd and Christian Robinson. for you, Sally.
So if you are shopping for any music lovers this year, you have hit a particularly fabulous year for that because there is so much great stuff coming out right now. I'm going to start with the biggest and most expensive, but I don't even have it to hold up for you because we sold out, but we're getting more in, 5 more. So if you want it, hurry. It's called Lyrics, and it's a 2-volume slipcase collection of Paul McCartney's songs from 1956 to the present, pairing definitive texts of 154 songs with first-person commentaries on his life and music, revealing how the songs came to be and the people who inspired them. It also includes a bunch of images from McCartney's personal archives, including handwritten texts, paintings, and photographs. So any Paul McCartney lover will embrace this literary and visual record of one of the greatest songwriters of all times. Moving forward in time, we have this fascinating new book by Questlove, Music is History, which explores popular music through the context of American history over 50 years, connecting issues of race, gender, and politics with identity, and identity with Questlove's own personal point of view. Questlove was born into a musical family, and his parents took him on tour with them, so he essentially grew up backstage. He's the drummer for the band The Roots, which is the in-house band for The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. He is also an adjunct professor of music at NYU. He is a musician, a musical producer, and the author of, yes, a couple of cookbooks. He made his directorial debut with The Summer of Soul in 2021, hello, a wonderful documentary about the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival. I don't know how many of you saw it, but it saved my life during the pandemic. It was awesome. So what Questlove does is he starts in 1971, the year he was born. Yikes, I feel really old now. And each chapter covers a year. So he starts with a list of the key events that took place that year. And then he selects a song and just unpacks it and explores what was happening in the music world and the world in general, showing how music has touched upon a wide range of social and racial shifts and has influenced culture in ways both big and small. He also talks in his book about the importance of not accepting what other people say at face value. When you see something that seems suspect, he says, look it up and educate yourself. Be an active participant. He says, whenever there's history happening, there's more than one history happening. He also says, most important, don't let this be your last book. Get a stack going on the table next to your bed and another stack going on the counter in your kitchen. Always have something within arm's reach. As a book lover and a bookseller, I especially appreciate that advice. Another book that explores more contemporary musical history is Major Labels, A History of Popular Music in 7 Genres by Khalifa Saneh, a staff writer for The New Yorker. This is a bit of a deeper study and a little bit less personal, covering popular music over the past 50 years. He talks about rock, R&B, country, punk, hip hop, dance music, and pop, examining how popular culture unites and divides us, charting the ways genres become communities. As in Questlove's book, Race is a Powerful Touchstone. Ira Glass of This American Life said of the book, Major Labels is a completely enjoyable history that told me 1,000 things I didn't know. And one of the book's greatest pleasures made me see a lot of musicians I thought I knew or half knew in a whole new light. And Alex Ross, who is the music critic of The New Yorker and the author of Wagnerism, which by the way is just out in paperback, says Major Labels is the most elegant history of popular music ever written, zealous in spirit, exact in execution, ferociously acute from the first sentence to the last. But we also have coffee table books on the Carpenters and Woody Guthrie, a seriously deep dive biography of Led Zeppelin, which is worth it for the photographs alone, but is a fascinating history. We have a new book about the band, the Drive-By Truckers, called Where the Devil Don't Stay. And if you know someone who enjoys reading well-written memoirs by singer-songwriters, we have Songteller by Dave Grohl and Broken Horses by Brandi Carlile. And if you miss out on Lyrics or Paul just isn't your favorite Beatle, you can always go for The Beatles Get Back, the new book that accompanies the recently released documentary by the same name. And with that, I will turn it over.
Okay, so this next stack of books for me is from, I've created my own category. This is books with digital media origins. So not book to movie, but digital media to book. The first is Collective Wisdom, edited by Grace Bonney. Grace Bonney founded the uber popular and industry defining Design Sponge blog back in 2004. And she's also the writer editor of In the Company of Women, which was one of our favorites from a couple of years ago. This new collection with over 100 interviews with successful women at the top of their careers enjoys an even more expansive look at social engagement, shared responsibility, and the capacity for joy from the perspective of age and a diversity of backgrounds and experience. It's a perfect gift for literally every woman in your life. Those celebrating and wanting validation. I open up to a picture with no pic or a page with no pictures. Oh, here's Amy Denadil. There's just an amazing collection of folks in here. Lisa Congdon is in here. Cheryl Street is in here. There's Julia Alvarez. So it's for women celebrating and wanting validation of the work they've accomplished, or those looking for advice as they reach for the top. So I think this could be, I have to admit, I've bought multiple copies for the women in my life. So collective wisdom. The next one is Gastro Obscura. Maybe some of you remember from a couple of years ago, Atlas Obscura. This is from the desk of another uber popular website, Atlas Obscura, and it comes a new guide to feeding your global food curiosity. And just like Atlas Obscura, the authors, one of these authors is local to Portland, they want to share their global finds when it comes to food, places to try, and recipes. And this is literally a food adventurer's guide. So if you know someone who really loves food and loves thinking about food from a global perspective, this is a wonderful book. And Cecily Wong, Dylan Thoris, and Cecily Wong is from Portland. So great. And inside of that one. The last one of my new found category is Immune. This is a book developed from the YouTube Science Channel, which I'm not going to say correctly. My husband tried to teach it to me last night in German. Kurzgesagt, which attempts to take complicated science topics and teach them in interesting and easy to understand ways. Obviously, this particular story is all about our immune systems. We find that pretty significant for the times. So there are pictures in here as well. Lots of infographics. Pretty fabulous for anyone in your world who is particularly interested in biology. So Immune. And this is from Philip Detmer. All right. Moving through my snacks.
All right, so I've talked about my favorite book of the year, about gardening and about music. And now I'm going to talk about strong women, kind of feeding off of Kim's collective wisdom. So when I saw this first book in the publisher catalog, I have to admit I was a little doubtful. The title kind of put me off, and I thought, this isn't going to be that big of a deal. But I got to say, I was wrong. So this is Girly Drinks, A World History of Women and Alcohol by Mallory O'Meara. And it is a truly fascinating history of alcohol and drinking from the perspective of women's roles in it. Speaking of which, that makes me thirsty. The history of alcohol and drinking is an amalgamation of anthropology, chemistry, sociology, culinary history, economics, politics, and science. And O'Meara covers the whole gamut from ancient Mesopotamia to now and all across the globe. The book focuses on 15 women in different time periods, including Cleopatra, Hildegard von Bingen, Catherine the Great, huzzah, and the widow of Veuve Clicquot. But it also talks about the world's first celebrity female bartender, the queen of the bootleggers during Prohibition, and the first woman to achieve long-term sobriety in AA history, among others. The book is well researched, but written in a very accessible style. I think if you couple this with a bottle, NA or otherwise, of something delightful, you will have a terrific gift on your hands. But I encourage you to buy it early so you have time to read it yourself, because I got to say, I learned so much about alcohol reading this book. And of course, we can't talk about strong women without talking about one of my favorite women, Ann Patchett, who has a new collection of essays just out called These Precious Days. Ann Patchett is not only a wonderful writer of both fiction and nonfiction, but also the founding co-owner of a very successful bookstore in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm not too proud to admit that whenever I find myself at the same bookstore conference as Ann, I tend to stalk her like a fawning fangirl because I admire her so much. Her new collection opens with an essay about her three fathers, her own and her two stepfathers. Here is a picture of Anne with her three fathers. At her sister's wedding. The longest essay and the title essay is a particularly moving one about her friendship with a woman named Suki, who was Tom Hanks' personal assistant. She got to know Suki after Anne was asked to interview Tom at an event about his collection of stories, Uncommon Type, and then he narrated the audiobook of her novel, The Dutch House. As you would expect with Ann Patchett, every essay in this collection is exquisite. Another great new book featuring strong women is The Correspondence by Judith Mackrell, which focuses on 6 female writers on the front lines of World War II, including Martha Gellhorn, Lee Miller, and Sigrid Schultz, who were making news while reporting news. This is a great, fascinating narrative. And then this is a book that I actually listened to while driving to Walla Walla and back, and it's narrated by the author. This is All In by tennis champ and champion of equality, Billie Jean King. She has fought for opportunity, equality, and inclusion every day of her adult life. She matters in a way that very few athletes ever have. Her riveting autobiography is not only the honest portrayal of the life of a sports legend, it is a piece of history. And one last book is by celebrated foreign policy expert and key impeachment witness Fiona Hill. There is Nothing for You Here, Finding Opportunity in the 21st Century. I am partway through this book and finding it incredibly compelling. Fiona Hill persuasively argues that America may be heading in a similar direction as Russia unless we address the crucial challenges facing much of the country, specifically regarding education, healthcare, and job opportunities. She unpacks how the threat of populism can quickly undermine democracy and cast a sharp eye on America's future while offering feasible solutions for change and telling her own story along the way.
Hey, Sally, I need more wine too. May I have more wine? I can't find the bottle.
Wine, yes.
Hi. So you all who know me well know that sports is definitely not my category, and even more humorous when between Sally and I'm the one talking about sports books tonight. But it's because there's one book on this list that I'm really excited about. Turns out I actually really do love baseball, and Joe Posnanski has written a collection of essays this year. Well, he's written them over the last 20 years. Called The Baseball 100. And this is the history of baseball in 100 players. It's a one-of-a-kind work by an award-winning sports writer and lifelong student of the game. It tells the story of the sport through the remarkable lives of its 100 greatest players. And he makes big point to talk about the Negro League, and so he's digging deep on some pretty amazing stories about baseball. And I think if you've got anyone in your world who loves baseball, this book is a gem. So The Baseball 100 by Joe Posnanski, and it will absolutely keep them busy for a while. I'm only offering big books this year, it seems. The next book is, I love this book. And if you've been in the store, you may have even heard me recommend it. The Third Pole by Mark Sinnott. Mark Sinnott is a nature photographer and adventure writer journalist, and he's been writing books about Everest and climbing for many, many years. You will have seen him in some of the movies that have been done, most recently about Alex Honnold or some of the major climbers that are out there. He got wind of a mystery of a body that was still missing on Everest from one of the first 2 potential climbers who may have even done the climb of Everest before Hillary and Norgay. And so he decided he was going to put a team together for National Geographic and try to find this body. And what he found was something completely and utterly different. This was all his climb. He made his own ascent up the infamous North Face in the spring of 2019, and he grapples really with the obsession that has become Everest. That season, 11 climbers died. All of them were mesmerized by an irresistible magic. And the third pole is a rapidly accelerating ride to the limitless joy and horror of human obsession. So he found something very different on the current state of Everest, which has probably changed now because of COVID. And I will give one more plug for this book, and that is my husband and Mark went to college together. Mark is actually a really, really wonderful writer. So this is a not yet another Everest story. This is another Everest story written by someone who's incredibly intelligent and very thoughtful. And this is a really good book. So the third poll by Mark Sennett. Two other sporting books, which again, I can't even believe I'm talking about sport books, but I am more, and maybe because they're all a little more emotional. This book by Abe Street is a coming of age story on about a baseball team, the Arley Warriors basketball team, which many of you may have actually heard about. They united their community in their Montana reservation. And this is an award-winning, beautiful book about three brothers from the Arley Warriors basketball team. And then last but hardly least, Carrie Eggers, who wrote the book Jailblazers, which if you've got any Trailblazer fans in your life, you may have heard about this book. Jerome Kersey, this is the new book by Carrie Eggers. It's called Jerome Kersey, Overcoming the Odds. And any Trailblazers fan of any generation would love this book. So that's Sports by Kim, which is humorous. So it's a good thing this is on tape because no one will ever believe I talked about
Sports by Kim. It's a good thing we're all drinking. That's just weird.
And thank you for more wine, Sally.
So now we're going to talk about the environment, and I'll have to ask you to just bear with me because this first book is going to sound really incredibly depressing, but I think it's also very important and it's also beautifully written. It's called The Last Winter: The Scientists, Adventurers, Journeymen, and Mavericks Trying to Save the World by Porter Fox. Porter Fox is a journalist who has spent much of his life on ice and snow, growing up in northern Maine, and as a young man traveling the world to ski the most exotic snowfields and writing about them. His previous book is called Northland, a 4,000-mile journey along America's forgotten border. The basic theme of this book is that climate change is devastating winter. The book opens with a description of the Carlton Complex fire in the Methow Valley in 2014, the largest single wildfire in Washington state history. It burned 256,000 acres, an area 5 times the size of Seattle, and destroyed hundreds of homes and other structures. And since then, that same area has been devastated by multiple additional wildfires. We then learned some truly frightening statistics. For instance, since the 1980s, the average magnitude of wildfires in the US has doubled, as has the cost of fire suppression. Temperatures in the US West are rising at several times the global average. And since the 1970s, the rate of winter warming in the West, try to say that fast, winter warming in the West has tripled, replacing snow with rain and reducing the Western snowpack by 20 to 50% and drying boreal forests in the process. I mean, just look at Portland. It's almost December and it's practically 60 degrees today. That's just not right. A vast majority of fires in the US West burned in areas that were once covered with spring snowpack. Fires in seasonal snow zones were 4.5 times larger than ones outside the snow zones. Where an average fire in the 1970s burned for 6 days, fires between 2003 and 2012 burned an average of 2 months. Just think about that for a minute, going from 6 days to an average of 2 months. That's insane. As snowpacks have thinned in the Pacific Northwest, fire frequency, burn time, and burn area have increased significantly. And then, of course, you have the revelation that the oceans are going to overtake the coastlines around the globe. So we will have billions of people who live either at the coastline or within 60 miles of the coastline who could be on the run from flooding in this century or the next. What really brought all of this home to Fox is that he and his wife now have a young daughter named Gray. I don't know if that reflects their mood at the time or what, but he writes, if she is a late bloomer like me, she will bear her first child around 2060. Earth will likely have warmed 3 degrees Celsius by then if humans don't stop burning fossil fuels. Sea levels will have risen by more than 1.5 feet, flooding coastal cities from New York City to Shanghai. Most of the Amazon rainforest will be dead, along with the world's coral reefs. Half of the Earth's population will experience 3 weeks of lethal heat every year, displacing 1 billion people from equatorial regions, radically increasing freshwater scarcity, and cutting crop production by 1/5. With billions of migrants forced to look for a new home, mass migrations and the resulting armed conflict could very well consume Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Now, I warned you, this was a bit of a bummer. For the bulk of the book, Porter interviews and travels with client scientists in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, the Alps, and Greenland, learning about the changes that are taking place and what lies in our future. But fortunately, the book is more than a litany of statistics and impending doom. It is also a beautifully written travelogue with wonderful character portraits. He writes about the land that he and his wife bought north of New York, which they have eventually moved to. He says, we had lived in the steel and concrete morass of New York City for almost 2 decades in tiny, expensive apartments. The existence of so much undeveloped land so nearby seemed impossible. Bobcats and fishers came down the mountain at night to prowl our woods. White-tailed deer walked silently between the trees, unflinching and uninterested in us. Red-shouldered hawks and peregrine falcons shrieked high above as eagles and crows dive-bombed them. When spring arrived 2 months later, a dozen puppy-sized fawns ran knock-kneed through the woods. He also wrote that a man studying glaciers in the North Cascades offered the presidential smile and wave of a lifetime national park employee. And a glacier scientist in Greenland gets this description. His hand looked like something you'd want to grab if you were slipping into a crevasse or snowblind on an ice sheet. He seemed the kind of guy, cheery, strong, confident, smart, who could maybe help to save us from the threat of winter's end. Sadly, later in the book, we learned that this same man walked into a crevasse and likely drowned in water at the bottom while his son worked nearby. Fox writes, it seemed an impossible end for someone so comfortable on the ice, but it also symbolized how quickly the world is changing as the man himself became a victim of climate change. What he struggles with the most is what to do with everything he's learned. As he says, where exactly should I drop this flaming bag of apocalyptic dog feces? How was I supposed to go about my breezy routine of bicycle commuting, food truck tasting, and backyard gardening with this nightmare sitting on my shoulder? Knowing that a winterless, inhospitable climate was coming for all of the mountains I've known and for my wife and me was one thing. But the thought of gray scratching out an existence in a superheated world was sickening. If I were diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I would do what the doctor prescribed. So when tens of thousands of the planet's doctors tell us that we are cooking the earth in an atmospheric turkey bag, why have most citizens of the world ignored the doctor's orders? So I think it's an important book to read, and it's very well written. It is a little dark, warning right up front. A very different approach is Warmth, Coming of Age at the End of the World by Daniel Sherrill, which is written as a letter to a hypothetical future child. So it's less about the facts of climate change and how to address them, but more a deeply personal account of how it feels to imagine a future and a family living under the weight of climate disaster, and how do we continue to move forward in a world that may not go on. And another one that's written not by a scientist is On Time and Water, which is based on interviews with leading glacial, ocean, climate, and geographical science, but interwoven with personal, historical, and mythological stories. And finally, okay, not quite finally. Thich Nhat Hanh has a book that is about not just the climate disaster, but also racial justice and inequality and the things we need to do to make sure that we can survive all this. And then you'd have to have been living in a cave to have not heard about Finding the Mother Tree, which is written by the woman who was the basis for the tree scientist in the Overstory. It is wonderful, powerful, fascinating. But another tree book that might have slipped past you is How I Became a Tree, written by the Indian author Sumana Roy. This is an exquisite, lovingly crafted meditation on plants, trees, and our place in the natural world in the tradition of braiding sweetgrass and pilgrim at Tinker Creek. I was tired of speed, she said. I wanted to live in tree time. Also, trees don't have to wear bras. So there you have it.
All right, I seem to be moving a little faster than Sally, so I'm going to actually do 2 categories at once now. I'm going to give this one back to you, Sal. The first one I'm going to talk about is some new and worthy an essay. And again, these might be ones that might be off your radar. This is Margaret Ranko's Graceland at Last. Perhaps you've seen her column in the New York Times. For me, it's been a weekly dose of natural beauty, human decency, and persistent hope from her home in Nashville. Even her recent blast on the ever troublesome leaf blower. So if you've read that article, the last her column a couple weeks ago was just scathing on the leaf blower, and she was really wonderful. This sparkling new collection includes 60 of her pieces from the New Yorker. She says, people have often asked me how it feels to be the voice of the South, writes Rankel in her introduction, but I'm not the voice of the South, and no one else is either. There are many Souths, red and blue, rural and urban, mountain and coast, black and white and brown, and no one writer could possibly represent all of them. In Graceland at Last, Rankel writes instead from her own experience about the complexities of her homeland, demonstrating along the way how much more there is to this tangled region than many people understand. So, Margaret Rankel, Graceland at Last. And some of you may remember Margaret Rankel is the one who did the beautiful, beautiful review of Brian Doyle's new book, which actually I happen to be standing next to, One Last River of Song. So that was her beautiful review of that book in the New York Times. The next one is Susan Orlean, who many of you know is a huge animal lover. If you've ever seen Susan Orlean in person, she's a little sprite of a person with a lot of energy, and she's incredibly charming, and that's exactly how I feel about this collection. She's led us into her lair of curiosity and intelligence in this new collection of her writing, specifically about animals. And the chicken on the cover, I think, comes through the essay in a couple different times, but On Animals, by the new one by Susan Orlean. And then one that had fallen off my radar, in all honesty, and we have a stack of them, and so then I got curious as to why we had a stack of them. It's called the Everybody Ensemble. And the publisher marketing of this collection says it best. It's equal parts call to reason and to joy. This book is an irrepressible celebration of our oddball, interconnected world. The Everybody Ensemble delivers unexpected wisdom and a wake-up call that sounds from within for readers of Ross Gay, Eula Biss, Anne Lamott, Annie Dillard, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and even Lewis Carroll. This is 24 essays that are a perfect match for the wit and whimsy that comes along with studying nature and animals. So this is Everybody Ensemble by Amy Leach. And then I'm going to move right into history. I was a huge fan of the original 1619 project that was both in the New York Times and the podcast that came along with it. The magic of this is that it's not a straightforward story, as of course history is never a straightforward story. They're intermixed in this new book, the 1619 project. If you haven't seen it or you don't have it, is a whole collection of essays, creative pieces, historical pieces by over 20 writers. Many of them you've heard and know about: Carol Anderson, Wesley Morris, Kevin Cruz, Ibram Kendi. So people you've seen, people you've heard about, and interspoken there is fictional pieces and poetry by a whole bunch of other writers who are talking about the Black experience. And Jessamine Ward, Natasha Trethewey, literally she's got a whole host of folks that are in this beautiful, beautiful collection of what it means to be Black here in America now, and how to face the history of the last 400 years. So 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, and we are thrilled to say that we just got a whole new shipment of these today, and as long as we can keep them in stock, we will. So the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones is the editor. The other book that unfortunately we don't have in stock, and I'm not sure that we'll get back in the next week or so, we're waiting to see when we'll get more copies, is All That She Carried by Taya Miles. And maybe some of you have heard me talk about this book before. This would be my favorite book of the year, except for the fact that we can't get it. We don't have it. It's a story told by a journalist who heard a story of a young enslaved woman who found out her daughter was about to be sold. And so she gathered a few things and sewed them into a little cotton bag and sent them off with her daughter. And that woman's great-granddaughter found that bag, and the bag survived. And embroidered on the outside of the bag, the story of her grandmother and her great-grandmother. And Taya Miles heard this story and decided to go through full journalistic discovery of the history of this family, the history of this bag, and of course has taught us all now so much more about what it meant to be an enslaved woman And this that just won the National Book Award. It's a spectacular and fabulous book. It's called All That She Carried, Taya Miles, Myles, Tiyya. And you'll see it in my list. The last two that I'm talking about are both unusual. This is Timothy Snyder. Many of you may have seen The On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. It was one of the wonderful little small outcropping books that happened after the 2016 election. Timothy Snyder is a wonderful writer. Many of you have maybe read some of his other pieces. And this is a graphic representation of this novel by Nora Krug, who is an amazing, amazing artist and has done other very winning graphic novels. And so they've taken On Tyranny and turned it into a graphic novel. We have stacks of this because we all think this is pretty spectacular, and people are buying them in stacks. So On Tyranny, Timothy Snyder, new graphic representation of that. And then this one was introduced to me by Chelsea Beaker just yesterday, and I went home and I've started to tackle into it a little bit. It's not normally my thing, but I have two teenage daughters, and I'm kind of curious. Emily Ratajkowski is an acclaimed model and actress. She's an engaged political progressive, a formidable entrepreneur, global social media phenomenon, and now a writer. Rocketing to world fame at age 21, which both through her modeling career and some of the outspoken things that she's done, she was in one of the famed oversex videos by rock stars. She's put herself out there pretty boldly. And she sparked both praise and furor with her provocative display of her body as an unapologetic statement of feminist empowerment. My Body is a profoundly personal exploration of feminism, sexuality, and power, men's treatment of women, and women's rationalizations for accepting this treatment. I wonder if she isn't going to be a powerful voice we're going to hear from again and again for the young women in our lives, and new representation perhaps of some fourth wave feminists. So fourth wave feminism. So Emily Ratajkowski and My Body. An interesting read. So that's this one. Boy, I'm still faster than you, Sally. Talk fast.
Hey. I'm so busy pouring you wine, I don't have time to talk.
I know. Thank you.
So I decided this morning to completely rethink my fiction discussion. One of the rare positive side effects of the pandemic, besides all of us learning how to get on Zoom, is that every best-selling author with a pulse and a few without wrote a new book this year, which is good news for all of us, but it means I spent more time this past year reading big books rather than discovering the lesser known treasures, which is a bit of a bummer because I kind of like to do that. Probably my favorite novel of the past year was Richard Powers' new book, Bewilderment, which I loved. I also read Ruth Ozecki's The Book of Form and Emptiness, Anthony Doerr's Cloud Cuckoo Land, Omar El-Akkad's What Strange Paradise, and Colson Whitehead's Harlem Shuffle. I loved all of them, and I'm happy to chat with you about any of them in the store. But I thought this evening I would talk about a couple of more under the radar books, starting with Willy Vlautin's latest novel and what I think is his best book. I'll get my hand off of it. The Night Always Comes. Willy is a talented and delightful local author and musician, by the way. The Night Always Comes is set in Portland, and like most of Willy's novels, it features a main character who is disenfranchised yet still hopeful, fighting for a chance at the American dream in a rapidly gentrifying city, Portland. The Willamette Week said, if throwing down roots in a place can change a person for the better, The Night Always Comes asks, what happens to people who never get the chance to do that? And Daniel Woodrell, who wrote the novel Winter's Bone, said that Willy writes characters so real that when they bleed, you get a few drops on your sleeve. So I highly recommend The Night Always Comes by Willy Vlautin. Another novel I really enjoyed this year by an author I had not read before is Wayward by Dana Spiotta. This book is about relationships, especially mother-daughter relationships, but it's also about gentrification, aging, and police shootings. In the opinion of George Saunders, somebody I have a great deal of respect for, he says there's not a smarter, more engaging, more celebratory writer working today than Dana Spiotta. So there you have it. And finally, if you or someone you know loves short stories, this has been a really crackerjack year for them. My personal favorite is A Souvenir Museum by Elizabeth McCracken. Loved this book. And then if you haven't already heard, the National Book Award winner this year kind of caught a lot of people by surprise is Hell of a Book by Jason Mott. and I've started reading it. It's good. The Booker Prize winner this year is The Promise by Damon Galgut, which sadly is not currently available as it is being reprinted by the publisher, and we probably won't get more till 2022, but I've started reading it and it is fantastic. So that was pretty fast, Kim.
All right, I'm jumping up. I'm going to talk about poetry, which is one of my favorite things to talk about this year. Lots and lots and lots of new poets. The 4 books I'm going to tell you about are actually by poets who you probably all have heard of or who know about. The first one is a brand new collection called Winter Recipes from the Collective by Louise Glick. She is the one that won the Nobel Prize last year. This is a beautiful, beautiful book, not just aesthetically pleasing to look at. It has this incredible cover, hardcover, but the poems themselves are just incredible. She's gathered the poems into almost small storylines, and they are really beautiful. And my favorite collection so far within this collection is the Winter Recipes from the Collective, where she talks about old Japanese men who are working on their bonsai and what happens to the remains of their bonsai trees. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. So Winter Recipes from the Collective by Louise Glick. Those of you who are fans of Anne Carson know she is just pushing the envelope and amazing. This is her new collection called H of H Playbook, and it is fantastic. It feels almost like a poetry scrapbook. I'm going to show you guys a couple of pages. And it is, the pages are cut differently. It's just a real adventure into words and image. And it feels almost like one of her workbooks, even though it is so completely and utterly magical. So this is Anne Carson's H of H Playbook. Here's a new, I think I lost my paperwork on this. This is a new collection edited by Arcelia Esquerme of Lucille Clifton's poetry. And I just think Lucille Clifton is one of those amazing poets that everyone's heard of, but no one's actually read any of her poetry. And this is a really, really wonderful collection. It's called How to Carry Water, and it's selections from each one of her books. And I think the introduction is one of the best parts, really talking about the significance of her work and what it means for women and what it means for African Americans and what it means for history. And honestly, a celebration of the 70s. So Lucille Clifton, How to Carry Water, selected poems. And then last but hardly least, and again, I could go on and on and on because there's so many amazing poetry that was printed this year, is Playlist for the Apocalypse. That's what happens when you drink too much wine. Playlist for the Apocalypse by Rita Dove. And again, this one has been getting a lot of press. And beautiful, beautiful collection from Pulitzer Prize winning poet Rita Dove. Oh, look at the picture of her. I think we would all be friends with her. This is a fantastic book. So the first one I open up to is The Spring Cricket Considers the Question of Negritude. So the new poetry collection, Playlist for the Apocalypse by Rita Dove. We have a lot of poetry right now. That's one of the amazing things about the pandemic. As Sally was talking about fiction, I think that's been happening for all creatives, and the poetry is just blooming. So come talk to us about poetry. We're happy to help you find something that suits your taste.
We have bloomin' poetry.
Blooming poetry.
All right, so I'm going to talk about some coffee table books now. This next book is by a couple of gentlemen you might have heard of, Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen, who developed a friendship, and from that grew a podcast called Higher Ground. And what this book has is transcripts from the podcast, plus photographs from their archives, from their youth. It also has copies of Obama's hand annotated speeches and Bruce Springsteen's lyrics. So this is Renegades. It's $50 and it is a fabulous gift. I think one of the most beautiful books we have in the store right now is this book, All the Colors of Life. We have about 5 copies, and I don't know if it's coming back again until the next year because of the reprinting issues. But this is basically illustrations that go through from childhood through school age. I love that one. Sometimes you just want to yell at your parents. Not anymore. to teen age, learning to fly with your wings. And then young love, having kids. That's a pretty good representation of having kids. Getting older. So this book is All the Colors of Life by Lisa Isato. I don't know how many of you saw the documentary, My Octopus Teacher, but the people that put together that have come up with this beautiful coffee table book of photographs from the underwaters. So that is a beautiful book. And this will take you back to your younger days. History of the Crayola crayon, how they were made, how they've been used through history, and some of the artwork that's been done by them. And because in our world, coffee table books include books about books, this beautiful new book is about 125 years of New York Times book reviews, and it has facsimiles of book reviews, reprints of book reviews, photographs of authors that appeared in the New York Times, interviews with authors. It is truly a fabulous gift for the book lover in your life. And then two books that I think are particularly cool are two new annotated books. One is the annotated Mrs. Dalloway, and the other is the annotated Arabian Nights. So beautiful books, beautiful books.
All right, I'm jumping in with what I know best, which is the middle readers for the middle readers in your life. I'm going to start off. I never thought I would suggest a Rick Riordan book off the top, because honestly, he doesn't need any more introduction. Rick Riordan is the gentleman who wrote the Percy Jackson series. If you had kids who were into Percy Jackson, this is a new storyline for him, and I think this is really fabulous. It's called Daughters of the Deep. And in this new series, he pays homage to Jules Verne with an undersea adventure tale with a female protagonist, Anna Ducker. His proven track record of humorous, well-researched writing. This is sure to be a classic for any young reader interested in the ocean, adventure, mystery, and science. She's at a special underwater school, and they go into a competition with another underwater school. This is really good. So, Daughter of the Deep by Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan, I give him a lot of credit. He has written a lot of books on myth that he understood and had researched. Then realizing that there were a lot of myths that came from all over the world, he enlisted the help of many writers of different cultures to talk about their own myth. And he's created multiple series by really award-winning and spectacular writers about myths from all areas of the world. And this one is actually a collection of short stories called The Cursed Carnival. And I just think there's a magic in short stories, whether they're being read out loud or for kids that maybe a book of this size would be overwhelming. Short stories can really have their place for young readers. This is the new collection of stories about mythic heroes, and it's by some of the authors that he's worked with on his new Rick Riordan Presents books. It's got to say, it's really, really, really good. So this is visiting Polynesian myth, it's visiting Indian myth, it's visiting African myths. This is really beautiful. So Cursed Carnival and Other Calamities. It's a collection of short stories by some of the top writers from the Rick Riordan Presents grouping. For any of you who know me, you know that I'm a huge Kate DiCamillo fan, and my favorite of all Kate DiCamillo's books is The Tale of Despereaux. Well, she's done it again with the Beatrice Prophecy, and this is illustrated by another one of my favorites, which is Sophie Blackhall, who I know you all have heard me talk about before. I know Sally's thumping her heart too, because she is a favorite of all of ours here. Kate DiCamillo is magic. She really is. She knows how to touch both the hearts of adults and of children. She understands what it means to be small, and she has written some beautiful, beautiful books, including The Magician's Nephew or The Magician's Elephant, sorry. Tale of Despereaux, again, is my favorite. She's also written a lot of more realistic stories, like Because of Winn-Dixie. So these are all titles that maybe you've heard of or your young kids read at one time. She's still writing beautiful books. So this new one, The Beatrice Prophecy, is all about a young woman, medieval times, so similar to Tale of Despereaux, where there's a prophecy that she will leave the country or leave the world, and she does. But how she gets there is pretty magical. So The Beatrice Prophecy by Kate DiCamillo. And again, right now we have copies of this one. Then two more books. One, this is a surprise favorite for me. So when I first saw this, I didn't think I would get into this, but actually I think this is a really magical book. It's called Orca Rescue, and it's it's written by Donna Sandstorm and illustrated by a woman named Sarah Burwash. Donna Sandstorm was actually part of the original Orca Rescue group. There was a collection of organizations that helped rescue little Springer. So many of you who are from the Pacific Northwest, I'm from Colorado originally, so I didn't actually know the story of Springer the whale, who broke off from his pod when he was very, very small, was lost from his pod, and he couldn't figure out how to get back. And some boaters noticed that he was wandering around in the ocean and seemed like he didn't quite know where he was. And there was a lot of conversation at the time between conservationists and environmentalists on how to best help Springer. He was rehabilitated and reconnected with his pod. And it is a beautiful and wonderful story, again, of community involvement, community thoughtfulness, and community collaboration. And it's really well done. And because of her connection to the Orca Rescue Society that helped in the initial helping to get Springer help, she's just done a beautiful job of both sharing information about orcas and about the story of Springer and how people work together to help Springer the whale. So this is a beautiful book. It's called Orca Rescue, the true story of an orphaned orca named Springer. And Springer was reunited with his pod. It was pretty amazing. So that's this one. And then the last one I'm going to talk about might be for your older middle reader. It's called The Last Quintista. This is from a new publishing arm, or a new publishing group called Living Corrido. And every one of the books they've published over the last 2 years have either gotten starred reviews or have been nominated for different awards. They just are really nailing beautiful voice and finding amazing authors. What Quintista means in Spanish is storyteller. And this is actually a fantasy story about a society where the only way to save each other is through story. It's pretty magical and pretty beautiful and very well written. So The Last Quintista by Donna Barbara Higuera. So this is one to find. You'll see it in our store. Many of you have probably seen it because we've had it now for a while, and it's been one of my favorites for the fall. So The Last Quintista.
Do you want to do science?
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Hang in there, guys. We're getting close to the end, so don't panic.
But not too close.
Not too close. All right. So every year during the holidays, we get people looking for biographies as gifts. And of course, every year there are great new biographies to give as gifts. I'm going to start with one that's by a woman who grew up in Oregon, Debbie Applegate, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning biographer. Her previous book, which won the Pulitzer in 2007, was The Most Famous Man in America, the biography of Henry Ward Beecher. So now she's gone in a totally different direction and written a compulsively readable and often jaw-dropping account of the life of the notorious 1920s Madam Polly Pearl Adler, who was born in 1900. She arrived in America as a 13-year-old Russian Jewish immigrant and went on to run Manhattan brothels and to pal around with such luminaries as Joe DiMaggio, Frank Sinatra, Dorothy Parker, Al Capone, Duke Ellington, Wallace Beery. Side note, Shelley Winters starred as Polly in the film based on Polly's memoir, A House Is Not a Home. For your person who likes a big, thick, meaty, detail-oriented biography, I would recommend The Last King of America, The Misunderstood Reign of George III by Andrew Roberts. This is definitely a doorstopper, clocking in at almost 800 pages, but he paints a deft and nuanced portrait of the much maligned monarch who lost America, concluding that George was in fact a wise, humane, and even enlightened monarch who was beset by talented enemies, debilitating mental illness, incompetent ministers, and seriously bad luck. For somebody with a more scientific bent, I would recommend Scientist by E.O. Wilson, A Life in Nature by Richard Rhodes, who is also a Pulitzer Prize winning writer who wrote The Making of the Atomic Bomb. So Rhodes explores the life and work of Alabama-born and Harvard-educated biologist and naturalist E.O. Wilson, who began working in the field initially focusing on ants and insects, and has grown to become a leading voice on the crucial importance to all life of biodiversity and the preservation of Earth as a natural habitat. Many are calling E.O. Wilson the natural heir to Darwin. And finally, I will conclude with the definitive biography of German Chancellor Angela Merkel by Katie Martin. This is the story of a research chemist and pastor's daughter. I had no idea that was her background. Research chemist and pastor's daughter who was raised in Soviet-controlled East Germany and who rose to become the unofficial leader of the West. George Packer has described Angela Merkel as the most important politician of the 21st century. And this is a much more manageable size. So that is The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel by Katie Martin.
And don't you just think she looks so friendly? I don't know that she is
I've
that
always
friendly,
thought
but
she looked pretty friendly. But
a good picture. I'm going to capitalize on science. I'm down to my last couple categories.
I don't have any categories left.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about science. Many of you have heard, and maybe you've even already bought, or maybe you've tried to buy. We have copies of The Dawn of Everything, a dramatically new understanding of human history, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about social evolution, from the development of agriculture and cities to the origins of the state, democracy, and inequality. This is quite the book. It's by controversial anarchist David Graeber. It's his last work before his untimely death last fall in 2020, and it's co-written by very well-respected anthropologist David Wengrow. This book challenges all of our current knowledge of the history of civilization, and it's very exciting. I think if you haven't already heard about it, you're going to hear more about it. Mary Roach, the latest from our very favorite science writer, Mary Roach, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law. She combines little-known forensic science and conservation genetics with a motley cast of laser scarecrows, langur impersonators, and trespassing squirrels. Roach reveals as much about humanity as about nature's lawbreakers when it comes to problem wildlife. She finds humans are more often the problem, as we can imagine, and the solution. It's fascinating, witty, and humane, just like all of Roach's other books. Fuzz offers hope for compassionate coexistence in our ever-expanding human habitat. And then speaking, my last book on my entry into the climate change, although with maybe a little more of a positive bent, Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squids, biologist Tor Hansen, who many of you may have read before. He's a stable writer in our Pacific Northwest cadre of writers. He's telling the remarkable story of how some plants and animals are responding to climate change, adjusting, evolving, sometimes dying out. And as you all know, he's a Pacific Northwest favorite, and this new book doesn't disappoint. And he's talking about animals and creatures from all over the globe. So Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squid. I can go on with what do you want to do next one? Okay. All right. What you all have been waiting for. The tome of cookbooks for 2021. And I have to say, there's a lot of cookbooks that have come out this year. Hasn't been quite the same year for cookbooks as it was last year, but boy, there's a lot of good ones. So one of my personal favorites is the new, this is a Norton anthology, literally, of the New York Times Recipes of Record by Amanda Hesser. So I was skeptical about this book, and as I was going through it to decide if I wanted to talk about it or not, on every page, I was like, oh, that sounds good. Oh, that's kind of amazing. And so I didn't even mark any pages because I thought I could open it up. Oh yeah, here we go. We've hit a bit of a southern section. Fried corn, fresh succotash, and sweet potato Cecilia. I mean, this is literally, I feel like I'm reading one of James Beard's amazing books of American food. There are famous chefs' recipes in here who partnered with different people at the New York Times. Italian beef stew with rosemary. I mean, everything you want to eat and everything you want to learn about. So The Essential New York Times Cookbook by Amanda Hesser. Okay, one of the pandemic's big joys has been Stanley Tucci, and all of you who watch the YouTube video of him making his cocktails for his wife with his beautifully ripped arms. Yeah, thank you very much, Stanley Tucci. And lately he's been running the CNN food show where he's traveling around Italy to all the regions of Italy and talking about the major and minor food interests in each one of the areas of Italy. He's a gem. What a wonderful human. And this is his memoir. So it's not as much of a cookbook. There are a few recipes in here, but more of a memoir on his relationship to food. Stanley Tucci suffered a terrible, terrible throat cancer, or I'm not sure where the cancer was in his, he lost in his stomach and his, at any rate, the cancer that he suffered from caused him to lose his taste. And it gave him a new appreciation as that taste has started to come back. So Stanley Tucci, Taste. And we have copies of this back. That was gone for a while too. Oh, many of you all have fallen in love with Six Seasons by Joshua McFadden. Joshua McFadden has a new book out, Grains for Every Season. And this is his love affair with grains and how we should all have a love affair with grains as well. And I got to say, his Six Seasons is so brilliant about the idea that instead of 4 seasons, we really have 6 seasons of food. We should be paying more attention to different grains than the ones we're normally and usually eating. So Grains for Every Season. We have signed copies of this right now, and we just got in a whole new shipment, and hopefully Josh is going to come in and sign more for us. So this is a perfect gift for any of the cooks in your life. Grains for Every Season. And then a staff favorite. This is, many of you may have heard of Ottolenghi before. Ottolenghi is a chef out of London who's originally from Jerusalem, and he and Sammy, oh gosh, I can't remember Tammy's last name. At any rate, they both are amazing Israeli chefs who have written a couple of different cookbooks. And I will say, if you've ever tried to cook from one of Ottolenghi's cookbooks, they're lovely. Food is fantastic, but they are complicated and extensive recipes. This is the most approachable Ottolenghi book we've ever seen. It's fantastic. And it comes from his collective test kitchen, where they are testing different foods and asking you to make substitutions and getting you to think creatively about cooking and about food. So again, if you have an Ottolenghi lover in your life, this one will not disappoint. Ottolenghi Test Kitchen. And it's a little bit smaller. It's really meant as a workbook. I highlighted a couple of recipes. I need to take my sticky out now off to remember to get the name. Oh, this is a chickpea cacio e pepe, which if you all love cacio e pepe, like I love cacio e pepe, maybe a little healthier version because it's made with chickpeas instead of spaghetti. A celebration rice with lamb, chicken, and garlic yogurt. So again, we may have seen some of these celebration recipes in Jerusalem, and I think this one is even more approachable. So it gives you how to make it your own, other possible options you could trade things in for if you don't happen to have the fancy spice that he's encouraging you to use. So Ottolenghi Test Kitchen, shelf love. 2 more cookbooks. One, another staff favorite. Carrie will be very pleased to hear that I'm talking about this one. This is called To Asia with Love. And it's an everyday, it's called Everyday Asian Recipes and Stories from the Heart. This is a beautiful book. And again, it was one where as I was picking it up to look at it, there were multiple recipes in here that I wanted to make. The first one being egg, pea, and ginger fried rice. So again, Asian recipes, incredibly approachable, weeknight cooking, To Asia with Love. This is a beautiful book. And then the last cookbook I want to talk about is Bryant Terry's Black Food. Oh my gosh. So if any of you are Bryant Terry fans, you know he's done the Vegetable Kingdom and Afro-veganism. He's a wonderful, wonderful chef, and he's focused specifically on vegetables in the past. This is a new take. There is a lot of meat in this book. And it's not just about Black food of the past, but Black food globally. So here's a vermouth spritz, what to do with good bones. And he's connected with a whole bunch of Black chefs to find out what some of their favorite recipes are. This is a celebration of everything from collards to jerk chicken. Here's jerk chicken ramen. So really, my mouth is sputtering. All this looks really good. So Black food, Bryant Terry, and I think you're going to see this book, if it hasn't already, is going to hit a whole bunch of the best cookbooks of the year. He's a really wonderful chef. So Black food, Bryant Terry.
I forgot I do have one more category.
Oh, Sally's back.
I'm back. You thought you got rid of me, but no, I'm back. So I just want to let you know that there are still some more books being published this year, coming out in the next 3 weeks. We have the newest book from Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. We have a new biography of the photographer Vivian Maier, by Ann Marks that will be coming out in December. There's a collection of adventure photography by National Geographic photographer Jimmy Chin called There and Back that I think is going to be gorgeous. And in the novel area of novels, there's a debut novel spanning a half century by Korean-born author Joo-hee Kim, who now lives in Portland, called Beasts of a Little Land. One of the novels that was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize, The Fortune Men, which is the story of the last man in Britain to be sentenced to death, a novel based on a real life situation. That will be coming out in December. And also a debut thriller that was one of the favorites by one of our staff members here called The Ballerinas, about a trio of ballerinas who meet as students at the Paris Opera Ballet School. We didn't get a chance to talk about mystery tonight, but we are fully stocked depending on your needs, cozy or creepy, contemporary or historical, paperback or hardcover, or whatever you're looking for. And same with sci-fi fantasy. Just give us some ideas and we will run with it. We have got something for everyone. And we were also going to talk about stocking stuffers, but then I read this weekend that any book can be a stocking stuffer if you stuff hard enough. So there you have it. But if you're looking for gifts, tiny gifts, we got you covered. We got all kinds of wonderful tiny gifts for you. So if you need tiny gifts, we've got those for you.
All right, can I end now? What do you
Yes.
think? Okay, so I'm gonna end. I'm gonna tell you, the one topic I didn't get to was YA. There's a couple of young adult recommendations on my list and you'll see them. They're both wonderful, wonderful books. And we, again, like mystery, we've got lots of YA here and are happy to help you find solutions for the young adults in your life. I'm going to end with sort of a smorgasbord of local writers. One of them you may have seen this past weekend in the New York Times Book Review is All of the Marvels by Douglas Wolk. So no joke, he literally read every one of the 27,000 Marvel comics. So he is now an aficionado and can tell you all of the marvels of Marvel comics. So if you've got someone, a comic reader in your life, this is definitely the book for him. We heard him or her. You're right. I'm so sorry for them. We heard him at the Portland Book Festival and he's fantastic. So all of the Marvels and any young person's dream, right? Read 27,000 comics and write a book about it. All of the Marvels. You know, from a couple of years ago, that Portlandness was one of our favorite books, literally of all time. In fact, we still sell it like nobody's business. It's written by Portlandness was written by two PSU geography professors, and they're back at it again. Hunter Shobi and David Banas have written Upper Left Cities, specifically talking about Cascadia and the amazing things we find here in the Pacific Northwest. They tell their story in maps, and the maps span everything from jazz clubs, comparing jazz clubs in Seattle to jazz clubs in San Francisco, more than words, the different languages in all three. They're really comparing Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. So anyone who's from the Pacific Northwest loves facts and information, or is sure it's rainier in Seattle than it is in Portland. All those things you can find out from Upper Left Cities. A Cultural Atlas of San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle by Hunter Shobi and David Banas. We're huge fans. Forest Avenue Press, another local press here in Portland, who's just, we're lucky to have her, Laura Stanfill, and we're lucky to have Forest Avenue Press, has done a collection of stories this year called Dispatches from Anaris, which is a collection of responses to some of Ursula K. Le Guin's stories. So for any science fiction lover in your world, there are stories by Fonda Lee, Molly Gloss, Lydia Yuknavitch. I mean, literally some of our very favorite writers here in Portland and some really good friends at the store. This is a beautiful, beautiful book and really, really well done. So it has a heavy feel. It feels important because it is. Tales in Tribute to Ursula K. Le Guin, and it was edited by Susan DeFreitas, who wrote an amazing environmental novel a couple of years ago. So Dispatches from Anaris. And then my favorite of the local books this year, in fact, I'm in the middle of it right now, is called Loners, The Making of a Street Library. Maybe some of you all have heard about the Portland Street Books program. Laura Moulton actually rides around on her bike and has a little book bike mobile that she shares books with the houseless population here in Portland. And the stories she's seen, what's taken her to want to do street books, she shares in this book. And she shares it with one of the men that she's become friendly with, Ben Hodgson, who talks about what took him to the streets, why he's had to stay on the streets, and the magic of what he's learned from the care and connection from people like Laura Moulton. So this is a beautiful book. It's hard right now to find the humanity in our houselessness situation here in Portland, and I think this is a beautiful, beautiful gift and a great conversation starter for every family. And
Get your glass.
get my glass.
Okay.
On that note,
Who I am on.
empty again, which is embarrassing.
Oh, cheers to you. Cheers to reading. Cheers to the holidays. Just a reminder, we are closed on Mondays, but you can do curbside pickup. If you have a prepaid book that you want to pick up, you can come pick it up on Mondays between 10 and 4. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, 10 to 5, Sunday, 11 to 5. And we are open online 24/7 on our newly revised website. So I think that's all we have to
It
say.
is. And really,
Thank you.
this was a huge night for us. We haven't been on Zoom for a while. We just want to thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for lasting the whole time. We're here for any suggestions.
We love to help people.
We
pick
love
out
to help.
gifts.
This is the best part of the holidays. You can come into the store this year. So here's to you. Here's to Broadway Books, and to a happy season for everyone.
And to our 30th anniversary in April.
Stay
Yay,
tuned.
Stay tuned.
Thank you guys.
Good night, y'all.